All righty. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Sam Reeve from CommunityConnect Labs, and I want to welcome you to our webinar today on how you can stand up your election outreach updates and reminders program. I know there are folks joining us from many different states and time zones, so I want to appreciate your efforts to join the conversation today. Before we begin, I would like to emphasize that this is a conversation that we hope to hear from you today after we have presented. So please feel free on the next slide, if you could go, Neha, please feel free to ask questions as they'll help all of us and we'll be able to hopefully speak to some of those questions. So just as a reminder, to ask your question, you can go to the Zoom Q&A panel on a computer on the bottom right of the toolbar, where you can type in your question and click submit at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll answer all of those questions at the end of this webinar. We'll also be sharing this recording and the slides in the next couple of days once this webinar is finished, so you can revisit the information and the answers at your own pace. Next slide. So our presenters today are Perla, the CEO of CommunityConnect Labs, and Jacob Modell, who is our VP of Product and Data. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Perla.
Thanks so much, and welcome all of you who are doing the important work of safeguarding our fair elections in this country. I think the last couple of days, we have witnessed the urgency and importance of the work that you do in upholding trust in our elected governments, statewide, locally, as well as nationally. So I want to say huge thanks to you for the important work that you're doing and acknowledging how difficult and challenging it is to do the work that you're doing at this time during the political environment, as well as the public health crisis. So a little bit about us, CommunityConnect Labs. We work exclusively with nonprofits and governments to help you engage your communities. We are a nonprofit, so our mission is totally aligned with you. Our work is to improve the health and welfare of our country. Next. In addition to elections, which we'll talk about today, our background is in doing census outreach, where we've been working with communities across the country in terms of engaging communities to ensure a fair and accurate census. We've also done work in public health, surveys, mental health, workforce training, public charge assistance, as well as utility benefits. Comprehensively, we really work around how do you engage the hardest to reach people in your communities to make sure that they get fair political voice and access to services. We work very cross-functionally, so our entire team is here to help you. We don't just sell software and technology, we're here to help you through the planning process, all the way through the implementation and successful rollout process. Next. So the work that we've done in the past include messaging strategy to make sure that there is culturally sensitive and persuasive messaging, data management in terms of helping you make sure your lists are valid, training and onboarding for census, for instance. We've done over 50 webinar trainings on outreach for vulnerable communities, including Latinx, Asian American, Hispanic communities. And then of course, we have our engineering team here who are here to customize any solutions for you. Next. Some of the clients we've been privileged to work with include cities, states, as well as counties. And here's just some of the work that we have done with these different clients on COVID rapid response, as well as census using the voter file. Next slide. We've also been mentioned in the press, so you can look us up. We've been around for more than 7 years doing this work of helping governments and service providers engage with their communities. Next. And now I'm going to turn it over to our VP of Product to talk about why mobile messaging for elections. Go ahead, Jacob.
Thank you, Perla. So as many of you know, mobile messaging is used by a bunch of campaigns and other things for get out the vote, and for a number of other reminders, emergency messages, other things that probably have come across your phone during these difficult times. Some of the reasons for that, which many of you may know, is it's a method of communication that's really accessible to the vast majority of the population. So Pew reports that in their surveys, 96% of adults own cell phones. Numbers actually 99% for folks that are younger adults, 18 to about 40. And in comparison to other methods of communication like mail or email, it's relatively cheap and has a really high read rate. So studies of text message marketing have found open rates of close to 90%. So even if people don't respond, they're at least getting the information. And our approximate sort of cost for reaching a voter with a set of messages, depending on the number of messages, that sort of thing, would be somewhere between 3 and 10 cents. And if you compare that to even something like a postcard, which is relatively inexpensive to design and inexpensive to mail, those are typically north of 20 cents per mailing. And the results in our work have been really encouraging, not just looking at open rates or getting people information, but actually looking at actions that people take. So in our census work, which we'll describe in more detail in a few minutes, we were able to reach out to the voter list, 2 cell phone numbers there in a few states, and we were able to increase response rates to the census on the days we reached out by about 1%, which, to put into context, on any given day, the average number of percent of households that respond to the census is something like 2% of all households. So a 1% increase is really, really sizable. And what was especially encouraging, and we'll show you some of the results of that, is most of this increase is not in households that are really easy to reach. It tended to be in households that were harder to reach. So these correlate highly with populations that are less likely to vote as well, people who are less likely to take the census. So you're able to use this sort of technology to cross some of the digital divides that exist with other modes of outreach like email, and reach people who might not normally, look at a letter or open an email that goes into a folder that they're not used to looking at, assuming they even use that as a primary means of communication. Next slide. So just give a little bit more detail on some of our census work. So one of our partners, as Perla mentioned, is the state of Virginia. So we worked with the state, or Commonwealth of Virginia, as they like to be known. So we worked with the governor's office, as well as the Secretary of Commonwealth's office, to send text messages to approximately 2 million Virginians. As part of it, it was an interactive experience. They could even sign up for additional reminders to take the census. They were given a link to take the census right there, as well as a phone number to call. And when we looked at the data, one of the nice things about census, kind of like voting, is the Census Bureau actually releases day-by-day data of how many households, or the percentage, to be more precise, of households in census tracts have responded to the census on a given day. And what that allowed us to do was to do a little bit of a matching exercise to say, hey, how many people in or households in tracts responded to the census on the days where we were doing text messaging compared to demographically similar tracts across the country. And so we'll present some of those results, but our estimate is that between 15 and 30,000 households responded to the census directly due to our intervention. So that's above and beyond what these demographically similar tracts across the country were doing on those same days. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the increases as a result of our intervention in Virginia were concentrated in so-called hard to count communities. So what does that mean? So the Census Bureau has developed a score called a low response score, which is basically the Bureau's best estimate of how difficult it will be for people in a given tract to respond to the census. So it's a little confusing because the higher the low response score, the more difficult that area is rated of being to kind of elicit census responses. So in this graph, as you move to the right, you can think about those as households that have that are somewhat lower income, more likely to be renters, more likely to be single parent households, more likely to be non-native English speakers, that sort of thing. That's all kind of rolled up into this score. And on the left axis was, on that day, the change in census self-response rates, averaged over a couple of days, actually, in this case. And what you can see is the red line is the actual Virginia tracts that we were sending messages to, and the blue line is a comparison set of tracts that are demographically similar on 21 different dimensions that we sort of looked at. And what was really encouraging to us is not only were we able to increase census response rates by messaging out to the Virginia voter file, but we were able to, but that gap is largest for as you move to the right? So these so-called hard to count tracts. And this pattern was similar in other areas where we worked in, where it seemed that, not only did text messaging help in general, but it actually helped in the places that were least likely to engage in census, which is another sort of civic duty, not too dissimilar from voting. Voting is actually a pretty good predictor of whether an area will respond to census. And we actually conducted a similar analysis for the state of California, which had an email campaign, and you didn't see this pattern. You actually saw that most of the increase from their email efforts, which were also not as effective. There's somewhere instead of about 1%, they were closer to about 0.1% or 0.2%. And in addition, that increase tended to be in tracks that were, that were easier to count, so that were tended to be more engaged or were predicted to be so. Let me go to the next slide. So building off some of our census work and other experience engaging these so-called hard to reach communities, we've developed two sets of solutions that are separable, but that we see could be really useful as providing safe and effective ways to encourage people to vote during these difficult times. So one, based off of the work that we just described, is using bulk outbound texts in order to get people critical voter information. So some of that can be personalized with data that you all have from your various voter lists. So for example, what's the current address that you have on a person? Maybe they've moved, and so maybe they actually need to re-register or update their registration in some way. Information on where their polling location is. We also understand that a lot of states are changing voting practices. So maybe your jurisdiction, if you're a state or county, has decided to allow early voting, and you can drop off votes in a safe way. Or maybe the polls are being run with different practices. So if there are social distancing practices, for example, being in place, and different queuing practices, that's information that we think would be really important to get to voters in order for them to vote safely during these times. The other solution is more inbound. So, and it's sort of built over a tried and true method of encouraging people to vote, which is a voter sticker. So physical stickers are great. It's awesome on election day to see people wearing them and doing that sort of thing. But we also recognize that during a time of COVID, a digital option is really nice, and it's great to be able to offer that to people who may not have a desktop computer or may not be on social media or what have you. So we've developed a text message way of building these sort of personalized stickers, allowing you to share them through text messaging, through social media, through really however you want. And because you're doing this through text message, in order to get this sticker, it's contactless. And you can also customize that in a number of ways, through custom hashtags or other messaging that's aligned with your own sort of outreach to voters. Next slide. So here's just a demo that we mocked up of what a sample outbound message could look like. So so the first message, which will appear in a second, this is a mock-up of what you might do if you wanted to send people their current registration information to double check that it's okay. And as you can see in the multiple choice, there are a few options to verify that information, to report that it's a wrong phone number because maybe someone's cell phone number has changed, that obviously happens, or if it's a wrong address, then you can link them to, you could send them a link to the place where they can update their voter registration information and make sure that their election materials, including in some places ballots, get actually sent to the right place. So once again, the idea behind this is to say, how can we leverage some of these solutions to get people the election materials and information they need in order to vote safely on election day? Next slide. So this is actually more of an interactive demo where if you do have a cell phone handy, you can actually create a digital voter sticker on your phone if you text the word vote to the number that's shown there. You also, if you do have your cell phone and want to try, this works a little better on paper than on a screen, but there's a QR code where if you point the camera function of your cell phone on the QR code, it will actually bring up a one-click to text option that some people use for marketing. So for most people, it's easiest to actually just have marketing materials or other things that say text vote to a given phone number or a short code, which are like a shorter number. That's another option as well. But this is how that sort of contactless thing would work. So I'll pause there for a second to give people a chance to do it, and then we'll show you what that looks like on screenshots for folks that don't have that opportunity. And I think I saw that a few of the folks who are dialed in, or we have one or two people who are dialed in, so I'll just read out loud what it is. It's texting VOTE, so VOTE, to 650-297-0779. And we'll also send that in the presentation afterwards, so you all can do it at your leisure as well. Okay, so moving on. So here are just some screenshots of what that experience would look like from a cell phone. For those of you that are trying it out, you'll see this on your own phone. It might look slightly different depending on your phone, but the experience is really simple. So, you send in this one message. You can do it. We offer multiple languages as well. So for our census work, we worked in over a dozen languages in customizing similar pledges to be counted and to take the census stickers. This is just kind of the voting version of that work. So, basically, you put in this start word. You then can put it in your name if you want. You can create a blank card as well if you're not comfortable putting your name. We always try to make sure that personal information on this sort of thing is optional depending on the person. And then what we do is we generate this sort of customized image, and we can customize colors, look and feel of it, that sort of thing. for your particular jurisdiction. And then we can send links to things like Facebook or Twitter, that sort of thing, with sort of shortened links that allow you to easily post it to social media. You also, once you have a picture message like that, it's very easy to forward to other folks. People really know how to do this. And so it's a really, really easy way that takes basically a minute to do. So you could imagine if you're at a polling station, instead of physically handing out stickers or whatever it might be, you just say, hey, here's a QR code for those of you who know how to do it to get your own digital sticker, or you can just text in this word to this number and you can still get your voting sticker and share it with your friends and family and social media. But maybe we're not doing the physical stickers this year for cost reasons or safety reasons. Next slide. So I'll turn it back over to Perla.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Yeah, so just I think that the points that you made around kind of these tools being available in multiple languages. In Census, we worked with nearly 21 languages, really will ensure that your hardest to reach people get access in the language they're most familiar and comfortable with. The fact that this reaches people quickly, because a lot is happening right now, and the only thing we know is that things will. And so to be able to rapidly communicate with your voters is really important. And then lastly, in this time of budget cuts, texting is also one of the most affordable ways to get your message out, especially compared to, direct mail or postcards that you might do. So for those three reasons, we're really excited about the ability for mobile messaging to really help you reach everyone in your voter file. Just to kind of summarize how we are also, how we're different from many of the vendors you may use. We really provide end-to-end professional services. So we have an entire project team dedicated to you,
to help you every step of the way. And that includes your planning, your implementation, testing to ensure very successful delivery of your messages. And we can also train your staff to do this as well and get up to speed on this. Next slide. I think we're waiting for Neha to forward the slide. There we go. Many of you guys have questions about cost. So it starts at $20,000 for the setup and services for counties and cities, and then $100,000 for setup and services for states. Pricing for third-party messaging is not included, so those would be like, the carrier costs and others. So you can contact us and we'd be happy to provide you an estimate of those costs as well for your planning purposes. And to contract with us, you can contract with us directly. We work very flexibly with all procurement systems. We exclusively work with service providers and governments, so we have a lot of experience about how to work with your procurement staff, and we're very flexible. Or you can contract with us through resellers such as Carasoft. Next. And I think that leads us to your questions. So I will turn it back to Sam to see if we have any questions from you all and get us started on the Q&A portion.
Great. Thank you very much, Perla and Jacob. So again, if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A box within Zoom. And so we'll break for a few seconds to get some more questions, and then I'll start to read them. All righty. So for our first question, we have the question, how long does it take to set up a program like this? I'll pass that to Jacob.
Sure. So for the sort of voter sticker, the inbound, it's very, very quick. It's typically a few business days once we get the sort of branding, colors, that sort of thing, logos. It's very, very quick to set up, at least in English, Spanish, for sure. And then if you have additional language needs, translation is, can take a week or so. For the outbound sends that we were talking about, that involves sort of data transfer, cleaning, as well as any of the message development. It's typically a week or two if everything's going, if everything's sort of on time with meetings. So it doesn't take very long to do and schedule. It's something that we could get stood up pretty quickly. Obviously, we also have limited capacity, so it's something where we would want to get ahead of that, do the sort of cleaning of the voter files to only be sending text messages to people who actually have cell phone numbers. So the earlier you can get ahead on that, the better for sure. Balancing that with sort of voter registration dates. Thanks, Sam.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. There's also this question around capacity. So how many people could you reach a day, or could the program reach a day, or send messages to in a day?
Yeah, so we're able to send approximately 300,000 messages an hour. So we can send messages to several million people a day if we're using a so-called short code, which if we're doing a large outbound send to a city, county, or state, we definitely would. So those are the kind of, they don't look like a real phone number. You all have probably seen them if you've gotten an airline ticket or something like that, like a message. It comes from a 5 or 6 digit number. So those do have really very large capacity. So if for most states, that means that it will take just a day or two in order to be able to do this sort of send. In our experience, typically somewhere around between 30 and 50% of voting records have a valid cell phone number affiliated with them. So even if you have, 5 million registered voters, realistically, that, a subset of them, maybe 2 million, might be actually have active cell phone records associated with them.
So on the question of numbers, then also, Jacob, can you say a little more about how we manage security around transferring those voter lists or the files from the state to CCL?
Sure. So, we've worked with a number of governments across a number of different states and different levels of government as well to transfer data. Typically, we use some sort of secure file transfer system. We're happy to also work with and we suggest sort of password protecting the files as well as using a secure file transfer system. So we've used Box, we've used ShareFile, we've used a number of other vendors for that. The way that we try to work is we'll use whatever works for whatever you all use and accommodate those standards. But that's never been a barrier to us being able to receive a file. And obviously we transfer the data back. So something that is important, and it's in part because we are a nonprofit, is we don't make any money off of selling the data. The data that clients provide us belongs to our clients. So just as an example, the state of Minnesota, who's one of our clients, we handled for census a lot of their cell phone messaging. But as part of the cleaning process, we also provided them a list of valid landline numbers, which they're now using to contact via a dialing service. to reach out to hard to reach communities for census. And so they sort of saw us as a way of segmenting their very large list to say, hey, we'll do text message outreach to people with cell phones because that's how, a lot of people use cell phones. And we can reserve our more expensive landline calling options or our more expensive calling options just to landlines. So once again, doing that sort of segmentation can be more effective for outreach, but can also be a way to save money and scarce resources.
Alrighty, thank you. Again, keep the questions coming. These are great questions, and you can keep submitting them in the chat or in the Q&A function within Zoom. So our next question is, does a user of this program need a data plan to be able to use it?
Yeah, so that's one of the nice things about text messaging. There's a lot of limitations to it because it's a technology that's over 25 years old. One of the great things is it is extremely accessible, almost regardless of income, race, other slices there. So you don't need a data plan to be able to receive text messages, and that is something that a lot of folks, when we work with disadvantaged communities, are very concerned about, is using up data caps and that sort of thing. And even on very low cost programs or free programs like Lifeline, which provides cell phones with talk and text plans for free for people who have you meet certain eligibility requirements, those phones are able to send and receive text messages. So, one of the advantages of texting over other technologies like email or other digital or apps or other things is, texting is on every phone. You don't need to install an app. You don't need to go to a website. You're just able to natively send and receive those messages, regardless of whether you even have access to internet. So that's part of the reason why we use texting for our work.
Thank you, Jacob. It looks like we have one more question. And if you have another question, please feel free to send it. This question is, how do you handle opt-outs or people who respond in ways that are not exactly in line with the program?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, as required by TCPA, so that's the federal law that governs communications for auto dialing and text messages as well. And you probably even saw it in some of the demos that we showed, is there are certain standards about informing people about message and data rates, as well as giving them an option to opt out if they're receiving an outbound text. So we follow those standards and also will help manage the opt-out process. From our experience, we have a number of additional sort of things that people might text in that indicate that they do not want to receive any future messages, and our platform is able to handle that and notify those people that they're removed. So if you are sending multiple messages out to folks, if they have opted out, we ensure that you're not spamming someone and sending them a message after they've indicated that. In addition, something that we try to do with opt-outs is, as part of the process, we'll give people an option to send us an email or what have you if they have additional questions or concerns. When we did this for census work and we reached, over 3.5 million folks via cell phones, I think that we received a handful, like somewhere around 5 complaints in total off of 3.5 million people. So we were pretty satisfied with those results. It was a really, really low rate. So we're really confident, in part because we are abiding by TCPA with with the sort of opt-out rules. That provides a great way for people who don't want to receive additional communication to be able to ensure that, and it helps keep people happy while keeping people informed.
Thank you. So that concludes the Q&A section of this webinar, as well as this webinar. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to our panelists, Jacob and Perla, for sharing and presenting as well. If you have any questions about the webinar, you can send those to info@communityconnectlabs.com on this slide, or you can also visit our website, communityconnectlabs.com, and specifically more about this solution, the COVID-19 elections outreach solution. And one final reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and we'll send it out to all of you as well and post it on our website with the slides. So thank you so much again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.